Hey everyone, this is James here again for the last, well, I guess not the last video, but week 7 video, and I'm covering Hashimoto's and Graves' disease. So just to start, we're going to go with the basic HPT axis as both Hashimoto's and Graves affect the HPT axis, but more specifically, they affect here at the thyroid, not so much at the pituitary and hypothalamus. So. Uh, Wrong move. Sorry. So yes, they affect mainly the thyroid, not the pituitary and hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus secretes its TRH like normal, comes down to the anterior pituitary, stimulates the release of TSH. That TRH is thyrotropin release, or sorry, thyrotropin releasing hormone, and then TSH thyroid stimulating hormone. And then that travels to the thyroid to be synthesized into T4 and T3, which the body primarily, or the thyroid specifically, primarily synthesizes T4 with a little bit of T3. Much of the T3 conversion happens at peripheral deiodinases, um, which is down here. If you look at this at step 4, right? Enters the blood, goes to peripheral deiodinases, and then gets converted. We won't cover too much of this on the right, and then too much of the liver or bile. So moving into specifically Hashimoto's disease, it's characterized by the destruction of thyroid follicular cells. So it is an autoimmune disease. What happens is T cells and B cells, specific lymphocytes, enter the thyroid and they essentially attack thyroid follicular cells, rendering them obsolete, which leads to thyroid, obviously cellular destruction, but also fibrosis as the inflammation makes the tissue fibrotic. Uh, it is a combination of genetic and environmental factors. In developing countries, it's more of an iodine deficiency, since the thyroid uses iodine to essentially make its thyroid hormones. And then it is the most common cause of hypothyroidism. So the low amounts of T3 and T4. Graves' disease is, sorry, the middle, the most common cause of hyperthyroidism. Essentially, the thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, or TSI, which is an antibody, and it interrupts normal thyroid function by binding onto TSH receptors at thyroid follicular cells and stimulates the production of uh, T3 and T4 without the control of the endocrine system. So, in both Graves and Hashimoto's, the hypothalamus and the pituitary are operating as normal. The dysfunction occurs at the thyroid. So, specifically to Graves' disease, the hypothalamus and pituitary lose their negative feedback function to essentially control the flow of hormones because this TSI, which is not controlled by the hypothalamus pituitary. It's controlled by immune cells. It's essentially secreting TSI from plasma cells onto thyroid follicular cells receptors, and it's constantly creating T3, T4, and putting that out. Additionally, it stimulates also we said thyroid hormone synthesis, but also thyroid gland growth. So you will see bigger thyroid glands. In some cases, not every case. This is just a visual of the disrupted pathways. I'm more of a visual person myself, so I like to see these things. Um, Again, the hypothalamus, I'm just going to call it hypo, and then the pituitary are not disrupted in any sense, right? They're still producing TSH as normal. Essentially, in Graves, they're producing TSH as normal, but because of the hypothyroidism, there is a reduction in TSH because that feedback is still working to the high amounts of T3 and T4 to cause that feedback to reduce the TSH produced. But even though there's low TSH, these this plasma cell right here, this purple thing, is still producing TSI over here, and it's just binding to these follicular cells and then just pumping out. T3 and T4. Um, Whereas in Hashimoto's thyroiditis or Hashimoto's disease, the hypothalamus and pituitary are operating as normal, but they're sensing low low T3 and T4. So in this case, you may see an increase of TSH, uh, or you'll just see normal, and that information comes from Riley et al. Here. But essentially, these Hashimoto's, the T cells and T cells and B cells, they essentially arrive or infiltrate the thyroid, and then they differentiate into their respective cells. B cells become plasma cells, and they release specific antibodies, which anti-thyroid peroxidase and anti-thyroid globulin to essentially attack and destroy thyroid follicular cells, whereas the T cells they differentiate into cytotoxic T lymphocytes, and this same thing destroys thyroid cells through apoptosis. And then essentially, the less amount of thyroid cells, less production of T3, T4, and then we have hypothyroidism. So some physiological consequences of Hashimoto's disease and cognitive, let me backtrack. All the information for this comes from Kotak et al. Here. But for cognitive impairments, there's memory issues, attention issues, executive function disorders, not disorders, just issues, mood disorders, and there is a Kotak mentions a positive correlation between thyroid function and mental health. So as thyroid function decreases, mental health does as well. For cardiovascular issues, there's an altered lipid metabolism. There's an increase in LDL, low density lipoproteins, cholesterol, total cholesterol, which increases the likelihood of atherosclerosis. Um, and there's additionally a decrease in cardiac output and increase in systemic dysfunction. Uh, Due to endothelial dysfunction throughout the cardiovascular system. So you're getting a weaker heart, more resistance that is fighting, and it just progressively gets worse until eventually some sort of cardiovascular issue occurs, myocardial infarction, stroke. I know Kotak et al. Mentions a higher prevalence of coronary artery disease, uh, more specific to atherosclerosis. But again, it's a very detrimental disease to the heart. Some gastrointestinal issues because of the slowed metabolism. You get constipation, slow gastric emptying, abdominal discomfort. There's an increased likelihood of developing uh, irritable bowel syndrome, and then the diminished muscle contractions of the or it's not small, of the intestines decreases gastrointestinal motility. Hematologically, there's an increase in the likelihood of anemia, specifically pernicious anemia, which affects B12 absorption, vitamin B12 absorption, and reproduction, specifically in women. It's likely to induce oligomenorrhea and infertility. And then in muscular system, you've got joint and muscle pain and impaired strength, stiffness, increased fatigue. And then in the eyes, it's a ocular surface disease, which is dry eye syndrome is the most common disease. So itchy eyes, feeling of dryness. So not an ideal um, disease, given its like vast physiological effects on the body. Graves' disease. So all the citations next to the topics or where the information comes from. But in cognition, we have reduced processing speed, reduced efficiency of executive function, learning difficulties, and then an increased chance of depression. Cardiovascularly, we have increased tachycardia, and then over time, it's likely to potentially to induce atrial fibrillation. Gastrointestinal, the opposite of Hashimoto's. So if we have constipation, in this case, we're more likely to have diarrhea, hypermotility, just almost constant emptying of the gastrointestinal tract. And then hematologically, anemia is also a a big issue here as well. In Giannakakis et al., they found that of the 87 subjects that they were studying, 33% of them had anemia, related to Graves' disease. And there's a inverse correlation between erythropoietin and hemoglobin. And I'm sorry, thyroid hormones often stimulate erythropoiesis, indicating or increasing red blood cell mass. However, this increase in red blood cell mass does have a shortened lifespan. So you have these larger red blood cells, but they live shorter, and then it leads to anemia. And then in the musculoskeletal system, you got muscle weakness here again, and myalgia as well. So similar to Hashimoto's, not ideal to have Graves' disease or any disease really, but this is a very um, vast and effective disease in many areas of the body. So, an exercise approach to Hashimoto's disease, all in evidence-based. In Vuletich et al., they examined 430 individuals with Hashimoto's. 93.8% of them were female, but they used questionnaires to determine an individual's occupational physical activity and their recreational activity. And so they just coined that OPA and RE. Ooh, that's an ugly R. RE. Sorry. I don't know. It wasn't, it might have been recreational exercise. Sorry, I think I misput the word. I think it's recreational exercise. And then they classified, even with those in the 438 subjects, they classified them as either having overt or mild severity Hashimoto's disease. And then they collected the typical thyroid hormones, T3, T4, TSH, and then thyroid specific antibodies, um, TPO, and then TPOAB, and then TGAB, which is thyroglobulin antibodies, and thyroid peroxidase antibodies as TPO. So they found correlations between OPA and free T4, TSH, and then an increase in, this is specific to OPA, sorry, we should have mentioned that first. But the correlation between OPA and T4 was a decrease in T4. There was an increase in TSH and then an increase in thyroid peroxidase antibodies. Whereas in the recreational exercise group, uh, they had a decrease in TSH and a decrease in thyroglobulin antibodies. And this is all in the overt group, so the most severe cases. Um, sorry, I was blanked out. But I forgot to mention that they classify these groups or it's pretty much the hours spent moving or doing things. Uh, Whether it be like again occupational activity or like exercise outside of occupation. They pretty much calculated their hours and how much they move, and that's what separates the OPA group from the RE group. And essentially, this study showed that the people that don't move as much, which is the OPA group, um, they have a reduction. I'm sorry, they have a that reduction in T4 with no change in T3, which we would like to see an increase in T3, right? If you're producing T4, uh, if you have if you have a decrease in T4, we're assuming in a healthy person, right? It's going to peripheral sites to be deiodinized into T3, but there was no change in it. So we have the low T4 potentially shows us this low thyroid function, but the increase in TSH shows that the hypothalamus and the pituitary is responsive because they are pushing out the TSH in response to just kind of movement, whether it be exercise or not. But there was an increase, more importantly, an increase in antibodies that destroy thyroid function. So the less likely someone is to move, there's more of an increased chance that their thyroid antibodies are being produced and just destroying their thyroid. Conversely, when you look at the recreational exercise group, the decrease in TSH, we are presuming that the TSH is being utilized by the thyroid, given these people are doing a little bit more exercise. Uh, and we can probably presume that given the decrease of thyroglobulin antibodies. So that decrease in the antibodies that's destroying thyroglobulin, which is doing the work to convert uh, um, like iodine and uh, choosing it all to synthesize, essentially synthesize T4 and T3. So the decrease in the antibody that's stopping all that is a pretty positive sign. So in this case, it's kind of shown us the more we move, the more likely we are to, the more we exercise. It's just healthier it leads us to be, specifically to the thyroid, at least in this case. So, an exercise approach to Graves' disease, Kudovich et al. Examined 62 individuals with Graves' disease, and they had an experimental group and a control group. Both groups had 62 people. In this 3-week experiment, the experimental group or the exercise group performed daily walking, strength training, stretchings, where the control group did leisure activities. The exercise group saw a significant increase in O2 consumption, a decrease in thyroxine, increase in thyrotropin, and reported less fatigue. And these individuals, or at least the exercise group, they had higher rates of withdrawal from medication within 6 months, 84% compared to the control group. So it's pretty evident in a case of hyperthyroidism that exercise is assisting in utilizing those excess thyroid hormones. Um, so really, exercise is effective at managing both disorders, but I think really not mentioned in both of these studies is the importance of um, and thyroid disorders, appropriate programming to ensure that we are not overstressing the body. It's extremely important because we know the HPA axis has a unique interplay with the HPT axis, and especially for leaning someone toward a exercise program that is like overstimulating and they kind of reach those bounds of non-functional overreaching or overtraining. These are extremely detrimental because it's pushing this person into like further fatigue, which is already um, a key symptom of both diseases, and then it's already slowing their recovery. So um, that's everything I have for Hashimoto's and Graves' disease. Here's my references. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if